Karen charged 500 strangers $50 each to camp on my land without asking. $25,000 profit from stealing my grandfather's property for her community wellness retreat weekend. What she didn't expect was 40,000 angry bees teaching those entitled campers the difference between public parks and private property. By the time the ambulances stopped coming, Karen learned why you don't mess with a retired firefighter who's got nothing left to lose and everything to protect. See, I'm Wesley Hoffman, and for 30 years I ran into burning buildings to save people's lives. But when someone tries to profit off land my family's owned for 3 generations, well, that's when I discovered my bees make better backup than any fire crew ever did. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Let me paint you a picture of how this whole mess started. I'm Wes Hoffman, 62 years old, been living on the same 15 acres outside Millerville, California my whole life. My grandfather bought this land back in 1952 when it was still real farm country. Now it's what they call the rural-suburban border. Old-timers like me mixed in with Silicon Valley refugees who think they can buy their way into small-town life. 3 years ago, my wife Sharon died from cancer. 43 years together, and suddenly I'm rattling around this old ranch house like a marble in a coffee can. The fire department pension keeps the lights on, but barely. Got a bum knee from when a roof collapsed on me in 2018, so the heavy lifting days are over. That's when I started keeping bees. Sharon always said, help your neighbors, they'll help you back, and honey seemed like a good way to do both. Plus, bees don't judge you when you talk to yourself at 4 in the morning. I named each hive after fallen firefighters: Rodriguez, Captain Murphy, Jimmy Kowalski. These boxes became my therapy, my income, and my connection to something bigger than grief. The sweet smell of honey mixing with diesel fumes from my old pickup became the soundtrack of my new normal. Every morning I'd make coffee with my own honey, walk the hive rows listening to that distant power line hum of 40,000 workers who actually knew their purpose. Then Karen Westfield showed up like a bad rash. Karen moved here 18 months ago with her husband Derek, bought the biggest house in the new Meadowview development, one of those fake Mediterranean monstrosities with more square footage than my grandfather's entire farm. Karen's 42, drives a white Tesla Model X with blessed plates, and has 47,000 Instagram followers watching her document her authentic rural lifestyle. And she's a yoga instructor and life coach, which apparently qualifies her to run other people's lives. Derek owns some tech consulting firm called Streamline Solutions, works from his home office managing server farms or data whatever. The kind of guy who wears $200 hiking boots that have never seen actual dirt. Within 6 months, Karen got herself elected HOA president. Her platform? Bringing community standards to our changing neighborhood. Translation: making life hell for anyone who doesn't fit her suburban fantasy. The crunch of gravel under my firefighter boots announced my morning hive inspections, while Karen's expensive athletic shoes click-clacked down my driveway uninvited. She'd show up with clipboards like some kind of agricultural inspector, pointing at my bee boxes and vegetable garden like they were health violations. Last November, she filed her first official complaint. Dangerous beehives pose threat to children and decrease property values. Demanded immediate removal or $500 daily fines starting in 30 days. Threatened to call animal control, claimed my bees violated some livestock ordinance she probably made up. Here's what Karen didn't understand. I spent 30 years protecting this community. Pulled kids out of burning houses, gave CPR to grandmothers, held dying strangers until the ambulances arrived. The fire service teaches you 2 things: brotherhood and protecting those who can't protect themselves. But it also teaches you that bullies understand exactly one language: consequences. Standing in my kitchen that morning, reading Karen's certified letter while tasting the bitter residue of stress in my coffee, I realized my grief period was officially over. Sharon always worried I'd get too angry, lose my temper like the old days. But this wasn't about temper. This was about principle. Karen had made her first mistake, assuming a man with nothing left to lose would just roll over for someone with everything to gain. She was about to discover that retired firefighters know a thing or two about controlled burns. 3 weeks later, Karen escalated to psychological warfare. She organized something called a neighborhood safety assessment meeting at the community center, complete with a county animal control officer she'd somehow convinced to attend. I walked into that stale coffee-smelling room and found 30 neighbors plus this official-looking guy with a badge. Karen had prepared a slideshow, actual PowerPoint slides about bee attack statistics, with photos she'd clearly pulled from the internet. One showed someone in a hospital bed, another had bees swarming around a school playground. Pure fiction, but presented with the confidence of a pharmaceutical sales rep. "Mr. Hoffman's hobby has become a public menace," Karen announced, clicking through slides with the authority of someone who'd never been closer to a bee than the honey aisle at Whole Foods. "These are Africanized killer bees, and they're threatening our children's safety." The animal control officer, a young guy named Rodriguez, different Rodriguez than my hive, looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I've reviewed the complaint, but I'm not actually a bee expert. I mainly handle dogs and cats." That's when I stood up, producing a folder thick enough to choke a horse. "Well, I am an expert, Rodriguez. 3 years of state certification, proper registration with the Agricultural Commissioner, membership in the Central Valley Beekeepers Association, and written support from 6 neighbors who actually like having pollinators around." I walked him through my permits, all current, all legal. Showed him hive placement diagrams proving I maintained proper distances from property lines. Presented my certificates from the state beekeeping program. Even had a letter from old Eddie Kowalski next door, saying my bees helped his tomato garden produce twice as much as usual. Karen's face went through several shades of red as her presentation collapsed. "But what about the dangerous African strains?" she sputtered. "I keep Italian honeybees," I explained to Rodriguez. "Gentle as house cats, bred for temperament and honey production. Takes a lot to rile them up." Rodriguez started packing his clipboard. "Mr. Hoffman, your operation looks completely legitimate. Mrs. Westfield, you mentioned aggressive Africanized bees in your complaint, but that's clearly not what we're dealing with here." The mini twist hit like a slap. Rodriguez continued. "Actually, ma'am, filing false reports about bee species is a misdemeanor. You might want to be more careful about your accusations." Karen went nuclear. Stood up so fast her metal folding chair squeaked against the linoleum like fingernails on a chalkboard. "This isn't over, Hoffman. I know people. I have resources. You can't intimidate me with your good old boy network." She stormed out in her $200 hiking boots that had never seen real hiking, leaving behind the lingering cloud of vanilla perfume that probably cost more than I spend on groceries in a month. But here's the thing about small towns. Information travels faster than Karen's Tesla. Within 2 days, I learned something interesting about HOA authority limits from my lawyer buddy Pete Kowalski, Eddie's son. Pete explained that homeowner associations can only regulate properties actually governed by recorded deed restrictions. My land predates the development by 70 years. There are no covenants, conditions, or restrictions on my grandfather's original deed. Karen has exactly 0 legal authority over agricultural activities on my property. Translation: she can file complaints until her manicured fingers fall off, but she can't actually make me do anything. The nervous throat clearing from neighbors during that meeting told me everything I needed to know. Half of them were scared of Karen's social media influence. The other half were just tired of drama. But Mrs. Patterson, who's lived here since the 60s, stopped me in the parking lot. "Wes, honey, don't let that woman run you off. Your grandfather would roll over in his grave if you let some city girl take what 3 generations of Hoffmans built." Driving home in my old pickup, windows down to clear the taste of community center coffee from my mouth, I realized this wasn't going to be simple. Karen had resources, connections, and apparently no shame about lying to government officials. But she'd also just taught me something valuable about her character. She was willing to file false reports, manipulate officials, and present fraudulent evidence to get what she wanted. That kind of person doesn't stop with one failed meeting. They escalate. They double down. They make bigger mistakes. And bigger mistakes leave bigger openings for people who know how to exploit them. The distant hum of my bees settling in for the evening reminded me that some battles require patience. Honey takes time to develop its sweetness, and so does proper revenge. Karen had shown her cards, lies, manipulation, and abuse of authority. Now it was time to see what other moves she had in that expensive playbook of hers. 2 weeks after the meeting humiliation, Karen launched phase 2 of her campaign, Death by 1,000 Cuts disguised as community wellness. She started something called the Millerville Community Safety Group on social media, complete with a Facebook page featuring stock photos of families holding hands in meadows. Within days, she had 200 followers and a mission statement about reclaiming public spaces for community health and safety. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when I was checking hive moisture levels. Heard voices coming from my back pasture. Cheerful, entitled voices discussing mindful walking paths and natural healing spaces. I grabbed my binoculars and counted 15 people in matching athletic wear, spreading yoga mats 20 feet from my bee yards. Over the next week, this became a daily occurrence. Karen's wellness warriors claimed they were walking historical farm roads with traditional public access rights. Pure fiction, but delivered with the confidence of people who'd Googled property law and considered themselves experts. They'd arrive in groups of 15 to 20, wearing enough Lululemon to finance a small country, carrying designer water bottles and taking Instagram photos with my beehives in the background. The crunch of expensive hiking shoes on dried leaves became the soundtrack to my morning coffee, and not in a good way. Meanwhile, Derek started showing up with surveying equipment that looked like it belonged on a NASA mission. Expensive laser levels, GPS units, the works. He'd position himself right at what he claimed were property boundaries, taking measurements and photos like he was planning a moon landing. I installed no trespassing signs every 50 feet along the property lines and set up trail cameras to document the violations. Amazing how quickly entitled people develop selective blindness when faced with actual legal boundaries. That's when I discovered something fascinating about property research. Spent 3 evenings at the county recorder's office, going through 70 years of deeds, surveys, and easement records. My grandfather's original deed was crystal clear. No public access rights, no shared easements, no historical farm roads. The only legal entry point to my property was through my front driveway. Translation: every single one of Karen's wellness walks was criminal trespassing, documented in high definition by my trail cameras. But the mini twist came when Derek's surveying revealed something Karen definitely hadn't planned on. His expensive equipment showed their house's septic system draining directly onto my property, about 40 feet past their actual boundary line. They'd been illegally dumping sewage on my land for 18 months without even knowing it. Pete Kowalski nearly choked on his beer when I showed him the survey photos. "Wes, this is environmental contamination on private property, EPA violation, county health violation, probably criminal negligence. They're looking at $50,000 in fines, minimum." The metallic taste of adrenaline hit my mouth as the implications sank in. Karen wasn't just trespassing for yoga poses. She was literally dumping waste on my land while claiming moral authority over my beekeeping operation. When I confronted Derek about the septic issue, he went pale under his tech bro tan. "Look, that's clearly a surveying error. Our system was professionally installed." "By who?" I asked, holding up his own GPS measurements. "I'll have to check with the contractor," he mumbled, suddenly very interested in his expensive boots. Karen's response was predictably nuclear. Posted on Nextdoor claiming I was harassing newcomers and using scare tactics to intimidate community wellness activities. Started a thread about unstable neighbors targeting families with children, and possible mental health crisis requiring intervention. The smell of disturbed earth from Derek's secret septic line mixed with the sound of his surveying equipment beeping like a smoke detector with low batteries. Every measurement he took just confirmed what I already knew. They weren't just trespassers, they were polluters. But here's what 30 years of firefighting teaches you about dangerous situations. The more desperate someone gets, the more mistakes they make. Karen's social media posts were getting increasingly unhinged. Derek's surveying was documenting their own violations, and their army of yoga warriors was creating a paper trail of trespassing evidence that would make any prosecutor happy. I started taking photos every morning. The tire tracks, the disturbed vegetation, the yoga mats left behind like expensive litter. Each image was time-stamped and GPS tagged, building a case file that would make my old fire investigation captain proud. Sitting on my porch that evening, listening to the steady buzz of bees returning home for the night, and feeling the weight of evidence accumulating in my kitchen files, I realized Karen had made a critical error. She thought harassment would make me fold. Instead, she was documenting her own crimes while teaching me exactly how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. The question wasn't whether Karen would escalate again. The question was how much rope I should give her before she finished hanging herself. 3 weeks after the wellness walk invasion, Karen decided subtle wasn't working. Time for the nuclear option, a full-scale community event designed to establish adverse possession of my property. She announced it on social media as the Community Wellness Retreat Weekend, a 2-day outdoor yoga and meditation festival for reclaiming community spaces and healing neighborhood divisions. The Facebook event page featured professional graphics, a lineup of guest speakers, and a location pin dropped right in the middle of my back pasture. 500 people RSVP'd within 48 hours. Karen had rented porta potties, hired food trucks, brought in a professional sound system, and was charging $50 per person for mindful camping under the stars. This wasn't trespassing anymore. This was a commercial enterprise built on stealing my land. The bass thump of workers setting up staging equipment echoed across my morning coffee ritual like distant thunder announcing a storm. I could taste the acid reflux building in my throat as I watched Karen directing the operation with military precision, clipboard in one hand, bullhorn in the other. But here's where it gets interesting. I'd spent those 3 weeks building my own case file, and I'd learned some fascinating things about adverse possession law from Pete Kowalski's research. Adverse possession requires 5 elements: open, notorious, hostile, exclusive, and continuous use for at least 5 years. Karen's event was open and notorious, definitely hostile, but one weekend doesn't establish continuous use, and 500 people camping doesn't create exclusive possession. Translation: someone can't steal your land just by throwing a big party on it once, no matter what legal-sounding terms they throw around. The mini-twist came when Sheriff Deputy Martinez arrived to serve Karen with my formal trespassing complaint. She'd received my call about the organized violation and brought backup, 2 squad cars and a county code enforcement officer. Karen met them at my property line wearing yoga pants and confidence. "Officer, this is a permitted community event on historically public land. Mr. Hoffman is trying to intimidate legitimate community activities." Deputy Martinez, who'd known my family for 20 years, looked at Karen's permits. "Ma'am, these are business licenses for Contra Costa County. We're in Sacramento County, and this property deed shows no public access rights whatsoever." That's when Karen produced her secret weapon, a folder full of what she claimed were historical easement documents, proving community access rights dating back to the 1940s. Professional-looking papers with official seals and legal language. I recognized the smell of fresh printer toner immediately. These weren't historical documents. They were freshly manufactured fiction, but they looked convincing enough to fool someone who hadn't spent 3 weeks researching the actual deed history. Deputy Martinez studied the papers while I produced my folder, the real deeds, surveys, and title reports from the county recorder's office. "Mrs. Westfield, where exactly did you obtain these historical documents?" "From the, county archives," Karen stammered, her yoga instructor composure cracking for the first time. "Strange," Martinez replied, "because I called the recorder's office before driving out here. There are no public easements on this property, and these document numbers don't exist in any county system." The weight of court papers in my manila envelope felt like vindication in physical form. Karen had just committed document fraud in front of a police officer while organizing commercial trespassing on private property. But the real twist came from the code enforcement officer, who'd been quietly photographing Karen's event setup. "Mrs. Westfield, you're operating a commercial event without proper permits, on property you don't own, with food service and camping facilities that violate at least 6 county codes." Karen's GoFundMe page for legal defense against extremist neighbors had raised $847 from people who'd never been to California, much less seen the actual property dispute. Reading her description was like watching someone describe a corporate pollution scandal instead of a hobby beekeeper protecting his grandfather's land. The nervous buzz of cell phone notifications from angry neighbors filled the afternoon air as news of Karen's document fraud spread through the community faster than wildfire through dry grass. Some supported her gentrification agenda, but forged legal documents to steal land? That crossed lines even her allies couldn't defend. Derek tried damage control, claiming the documents were consultant research and possibly outdated. But Deputy Martinez had already photographed everything and launched an investigation into the fraudulent papers. As the sun set on Karen's retreat setup, with porta potties positioned 50 feet from my bee yards and sound equipment powered by generators loud enough to wake the dead, I realized this was no longer about property rights or HOA authority. This was about a coordinated campaign to force me off land my family had owned for 3 generations. The question was, what were Karen and Derek really after? And more importantly, how far were they willing to go to get it? The answer came from the most unexpected source: Derek's own laptop. 3 days after the document fraud incident, my neighbor Eddie Kowalski knocked on my door with information that changed everything. His son Pete had been digging deeper into Streamline Solutions, Derek's tech company, and discovered something that made my blood run cold. "Wes, you're not going to believe this," Eddie said, spreading printouts across my kitchen table. The paper smell of fresh documents mixed with the bitter taste of morning coffee as I realized the scope of what we were dealing with. Derek's company specialized in server farms, massive data centers that require rural locations, high-speed fiber access, and cheap land. Through Pete's legal connections, we'd obtained Derek's business correspondence with commercial real estate brokers. Email chains dating back 6 months, site assessment reports, and financial projections that painted a very clear picture. Streamline Solutions had identified my 15-acre property as the perfect location for a $20 million server farm. Rural setting, existing fiber infrastructure from the county's broadband initiative, and what Derek described as motivated seller potential due to agricultural decline. The business plan projected $15 million in annual revenue from cloud hosting contracts with Silicon Valley companies. Derek had already secured preliminary agreements with 3 major clients pending site acquisition. But here's where it gets ugly. This wasn't Derek's first rodeo. Pete found records showing Karen and Derek had used identical harassment campaigns in 2 other California towns over the past 5 years. Moved in, targeted longtime residents with HOA violations and code enforcement complaints, forced below-market sales, then flipped the properties for massive development projects. In Pleasanton, they'd forced out an elderly couple running a small nursery business. Market value, $400,000. Sale price after 8 months of harassment, $250,000. Derek's development profit, $2.8 million. In Petaluma, they'd targeted a veteran with PTSD who raised therapy horses. 6 months of complaints about agricultural odors and safety hazards. Forced sale at 60% of market value. Derek's data center development netted $3.2 million. The smooth river rock Sharon used to fidget with during her cancer treatments felt cold in my palm as the implications hit. This wasn't random HOA harassment. This was calculated real estate fraud disguised as community improvement. Text messages between Karen and Derek, obtained through Pete's discovery process, showed their real attitude. "B-guy won't know what hit him. 6 months max and we'll have his land for half price. These rural types always fold when the legal pressure gets serious." Another message: "Community wellness angle is perfect cover. Who's going to argue against yoga and meditation? Old-timer looks like the villain trying to stop healthy activities." The sound of Pete's pen clicking during our phone calls became the rhythm of revelation as more evidence emerged. Derek had commissioned professional soil surveys, environmental impact studies, and infrastructure assessments of my property, all done without my knowledge or permission through county records and aerial photography. They knew my property's development potential better than I did. The server farm would generate more revenue in 2 years than my grandfather's farm had produced in 70 years. And Karen's harassment campaign was designed to break my will, drain my resources, and force a desperate sale. But they'd made one critical mistake. They assumed I was just another obstacle to remove, not someone with 30 years of experience investigating how disasters happen and who's responsible. Sitting in my kitchen surrounded by evidence of their fraud, feeling the weight of betrayed community trust and deliberate manipulation, I realized this wasn't about defending my property anymore. This was about stopping predators who used community development as cover for systematic theft. Karen and Derek had turned neighborhood improvement into a weapon, and they were planning to use it again on the next unsuspecting family. Time to show them what happens when you pick a fight with someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. That night, sitting at my kitchen table with evidence spread like a war map, I started planning the kind of operation that would make my old fire captain proud. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about controlled demolition of a fraud scheme before it destroyed more families. First, I needed to understand my weapons. Spent the next week researching bee behavior during disturbances, and what I learned was fascinating. When hives detect threats, loud noises, vibrations, unfamiliar scents, guard bees release alarm pheromones that trigger colony-wide defensive responses. Multiple disturbed colonies create what beekeepers call a cascading alarm effect. Translation: scared bees protect their home, and when 500 strangers start stomping around screaming, 40,000 bees take it personally. Eddie Kowalski helped me modify 6 hive stands with motion-activated release mechanisms. Simple gravity-fed systems that would drop entrance restrictions when triggered by movement, allowing full colony access. The smell of wood stain on modified equipment mixed with Eddie's muttered complaints. 30 years I lived next to your grandfather. Never had to weaponize bees back then. The feel of smooth, worn hammer handles from Grandpa's toolbox connected me to 3 generations of men who'd defended this land through depression, war, and drought. Now it was my turn to protect what they'd built. On the legal front, Pete Kowalski was building a case file that would make any prosecutor salivate. Documented pattern of fraud across multiple counties, forged documents, environmental violations, commercial trespassing, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. We filed formal complaints with the state attorney general and contacted the FBI's white-collar crime unit. But the immediate strategy focused on Karen's camping event. She'd positioned it 50 feet from my bee yards, claiming she wanted to prove the bees are harmless to her followers. Perfect. Let her prove it. I researched property defense law and discovered something interesting. Landowners can use reasonable measures to protect property from mass trespass, including natural deterrents like livestock or insects. As long as the bees were legally on my property and the event was illegal trespassing, any consequences were Karen's responsibility. The motion sensor systems were elegantly simple. Eddie rigged them to detect significant movement within 20 feet, about the distance Karen's sound system would be positioned. Loud music, bass vibrations, and crowds of people would trigger releases on all 6 hive stands simultaneously. Testing the system with honey samples revealed optimal timing. Bees respond to pheromone alarms within 30 seconds, with full defensive swarms emerging in under 2 minutes. Enough time for maximum chaos, but not enough for quick escape. I contacted Deputy Martinez with detailed evidence of the planned trespassing event, complete with Karen's social media posts advertising commercial camping on my property. She assured me sheriff's units would be positioned nearby to respond to complaints. Then I called Channel 7 News, told them about the Community Unity event that would demonstrate natural property protection methods. Didn't mention the bees specifically, just suggested they might want to film the interaction between entitled urban campers and authentic rural lifestyle. The financial calculation was sobering. Karen's harassment had cost me $3,000 in legal fees, lost productivity from stress, and property damage from trespassers. But Derek's server farm would generate millions while destroying the agricultural character that made this community special. Time to show them that rural doesn't mean passive. I reached out to victims from Derek's previous schemes in Pleasanton and Petaluma, both families eager to provide testimony about identical harassment patterns. The elderly couple from the nursery business were particularly helpful. They'd kept detailed records of every violation notice, every fraudulent complaint, every intimidation tactic. By Friday night, everything was in place. Hive release systems tested and armed. Legal documentation filed with appropriate authorities. Media alerted to potential news event. Evidence packages prepared for immediate distribution. The weight of Sharon's worry stone in my pocket reminded me she'd always said, "Help your neighbors." Well, stopping predators who destroy communities definitely counted as helping neighbors. Karen's final social media post that evening announced 500 confirmed attendees for Community Healing Weekend. She'd positioned the event as a victory over extremist property owners trying to intimidate legitimate community activities. Perfect. Let her bring 500 witnesses to her own destruction. Saturday morning would start with Karen's opening ceremony, complete with microphone and amplified music positioned exactly where my motion sensors were calibrated. Bass vibrations from her sound system would trigger releases on Rodriguez, Murphy, Kowalski, and 3 other hives containing the gentlest bees in California, right up until someone threatens their home with 500 strangers and professional sound equipment. The distant hum of my colonies settling in for their last peaceful night felt like the calm before a storm that would teach Karen Westfield the difference between community improvement and property theft. Friday morning, 18 hours before Karen's camping event, she made her most desperate move yet, attempting to bribe a county inspector to shut down my beekeeping operation permanently. Inspector Jim Valdez arrived at 8:30 sharp, clipboard in hand, and county vehicle gleaming in my driveway. Professional guy, been doing agricultural inspections for 15 years, known for playing everything by the book. Behind him, Karen emerged from her Tesla like a backup dancer who'd missed her cue. "Mr. Hoffman, we've received multiple complaints about your operation exceeding hobby-scale limits," Valdez announced, though his expression suggested he wasn't buying Karen's story. "Mrs. Westfield has provided documentation suggesting commercial-level activity." Karen produced her laminated inspection checklist, clearly printed from some random beekeeping website, and started directing Valdez around my property like a substitute teacher managing a field trip. "See how many hives he has? That's definitely commercial. And look at all this equipment." I walked Valdez through my actual records. 12 active hives, well under the 25 hive limit for hobby classification. 3 years of honey sales documentation showing $400 monthly income, nowhere near the commercial threshold of $5,000 annually. Current registration with the Agricultural Commissioner, proper protective equipment, bee health certificates updated every 6 months. "Everything looks completely legitimate," Valdez told Karen, making notes on his official forms. The metallic scratch of his pen on county paperwork sounded like vindication. "Mr. Hoffman's operation is properly registered, appropriately scaled, and fully compliant." That's when Karen made her fatal mistake. She pulled Valdez aside, thinking I was out of earshot while checking hive moisture levels. But 30 years of firefighting teaches you to hear everything, especially when people think you're not listening. "Look, Jim, I know this seems minor, but this guy is really causing problems for our community development," Karen said, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was conspiratorial. "What would it take to find some violations? Maybe something about hive placement or bee density?" The taste of metallic adrenaline hit my mouth as I realized she was openly attempting bribery. "I understand you're busy, and this probably seems like a waste of time," she continued, reaching into her designer purse. "Maybe this would compensate you for the extra documentation required for a thorough investigation." She handed him an envelope. Thick envelope. Valdez opened it, counted what looked like $20 bills, then closed it with the kind of careful precision that suggested he was thinking about federal charges. "Mrs. Westfield, are you offering me money to falsify an inspection report?" "I'm offering a consulting fee for comprehensive agricultural assessment services," Karen replied, apparently believing lawyer speak would make bribery legal. That's when Eddie Kowalski's voice came from behind the bee shed. "Got it all on audio, Wes, crystal clear." The mini twist hit Karen like a freight train. Eddie stepped out with his phone, recording app still active, grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery. "Amazing what you can hear when you're just checking honey levels, ain't it?" Valdez handed the envelope back to Karen with the kind of disgusted expression reserved for people who offer bribes to public officials. "Ma'am, attempting to bribe a county inspector is a felony, carries 2 to 5 years in prison, plus fines." Karen went pale under her yoga studio tan. "That wasn't a bribe, that was a consulting payment for professional services." "No, ma'am, it wasn't," Valdez replied, photographing the envelope with his county-issued phone. "And this isn't my first rodeo with development-motivated inspection requests. I'm filing a report with the district attorney's office this afternoon." Karen's nervous laugh sounded like a smoke detector with dying batteries as she realized her real estate fraud scheme had just graduated to federal crimes. Bribing government officials creates paper trails that investigators love, documented corruption with clear motives and obvious beneficiaries. As Valdez packed his clipboard, he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Westfield, this is the second time in 6 months someone's tried to bribe me over bee inspections. Previous case involved a woman in Petaluma who wanted me to cite violations that didn't exist. Same story. Community development concerns." Eddie and I exchanged looks. Derek and Karen's fraud pattern included bribing the same inspector in multiple counties. This wasn't just systematic theft. This was a criminal enterprise with documented standard operating procedures. After Valdez left, Karen tried damage control, posted on social media claiming the inspector was compromised and influenced by old boy networks, demanded state investigation into biased enforcement and favoritism toward non-conforming properties. But her camping event was still scheduled for tomorrow morning with 500 people planning to trespass on my property while she faced felony bribery charges. The weight of evidence accumulating against her felt like inevitable justice finally gaining momentum. Sitting on my porch that evening, listening to my bees settling in for the night, I realized Karen had just made the same mistake that destroys most criminals. She'd escalated faster than her judgment could keep up with her desperation. Tomorrow would prove that sometimes the smallest creatures deliver the biggest lessons about respecting other people's property. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes rural California feel like paradise. Unfortunately, it also arrived with 500 entitled campers who thought paradise was their personal playground. By 7 a.m., my front pasture looked like the world's most expensive refugee camp. Tesla Model X's parked next to Subaru Outbacks, designer camping gear scattered across acres of protected wildlife habitat, and enough Patagonia fleece to outfit a polar expedition. Karen had rented professional equipment for her community healing weekend. 4 porta potties, 3 food trucks, and a sound system that could have provided audio for a small concert. The bass thump of workers testing speakers echoed across morning air like distant artillery, making my bee colonies restless in their hives. The diesel exhaust from catering trucks mixed with the acrid smell of portable toilets being positioned 50 feet from my bee yards. Karen had chosen this location deliberately, telling her followers she wanted to prove the bees are harmless, while reclaiming community space from extremist property owners. Derek arrived with the same surveying equipment that had revealed their septic system violations, clearly planning to use the event chaos as cover for officially staking property corners. His expensive laser levels and GPS units were positioned around my actual boundary lines, ready to create fraudulent survey documentation, while 500 witnesses were distracted by yoga and meditation. At 8:15, Channel 7's news van pulled up. Reporter Jessica Martinez stepped out with a cameraman, expecting to film a heartwarming story about community unity overcoming neighborhood disputes. She had no idea she was about to witness the most spectacular property rights defense in Northern California history. Karen opened the event with a microphone and professional sound system, addressing her followers like a motivational speaker at a corporate retreat. Welcome to Community Healing Weekend, where we're proving that mindful activities and positive energy can overcome negativity and exclusion. The nervous hum of my bee colonies sensing disturbance grew louder as Karen's amplified voice carried across my property. 40,000 bees don't appreciate uninvited speeches at 8:30 in the morning, especially when those speeches include bass frequencies that vibrate through their hive boxes. Today we're reclaiming spaces that have been closed to community wellness, Karen continued, positioning herself directly where my motion sensors were calibrated. We're showing that fear and hostility cannot stop positive change. Perfect. Bring 500 witnesses to your own destruction while providing audio commentary for the news cameras. That's when Karen made her final mistake. She directed the sound engineer to turn up the bass for full community impact, apparently believing louder music would somehow legalize mass trespassing. The bass vibrations from her professional speakers triggered motion sensors on all 6 hive stands simultaneously. Rodriguez's hive released first, 20,000 Italian honeybees emerging like a dark cloud over Karen's yoga platform. Within 30 seconds, Murphy and Kowalski hives joined the party, responding to pheromone alarms with the kind of coordinated defensive action that makes beekeepers respect these tiny creatures. The visual impact was everything I'd hoped for. Massive swarms descended on the camping area like biblical plague, sending 500 people scrambling for car doors while Karen stood frozen at her microphone, finally understanding what consequences actually means. Food truck drivers abandoned equipment and sprinted for their vehicles. Yoga mats became frisbees as people threw them aside while running. Designer camping gear scattered across my pasture like expensive tumbleweeds as panic spread faster than the bee swarms. Karen's amplified voice cut through the chaos. Everyone stay calm. This is just a temporary bee disturbance. Do not let extremist tactics intimidate our community healing. But 40,000 angry bees don't care about community healing, and they definitely don't respond to motivational speaking. Deputy Martinez arrived just as Derek dropped his surveying equipment and ran for his Tesla, abandoning his attempt to establish fraudulent property boundaries. She'd been positioned nearby, ready to respond to trespassing complaints, but hadn't expected to witness such spectacular natural justice. Jessica Martinez and her cameraman captured everything in high definition. Karen's meltdown, Derek's surveying fraud attempt, 500 people fleeing angry bees, and the sweet sight of entitled trespassers learning that property rights aren't just suggestions. The sound of car engines racing to escape mixed with angry buzzing, and Karen's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control of her community healing narrative. But there's no controlling natural consequences, especially when you've triggered defensive responses from creatures that have been protecting their homes for millions of years. 23 people got stung during the evacuation. 6 required emergency transport for allergic reactions. Every single one had been illegally trespassing on my property while participating in Karen's fraudulent land grab scheme. As the last Tesla disappeared down my driveway, leaving behind scattered camping gear and abandoned yoga mats, I realized the most satisfying part wasn't the chaos. It was watching Karen finally understand that some things can't be bought, bribed, or bullied into submission. The bee swarms had barely settled when the real show began. Sheriff's units arrived first. Deputy Martinez plus 2 backup cruisers responding to mass disturbance with injuries. Then the ambulances, sirens wailing across rural morning air as allergic campers learned the hard way about respecting private property. Finally, Channel 7's second news truck, because apparently bees versus entitled campers, was breaking news worthy of live coverage. Karen stood in the middle of it all, still clutching her microphone like a ship captain refusing to abandon a sinking vessel. Her white yoga pants were stained with grass and panic sweat. Her carefully styled hair looked like she'd stuck her finger in an electrical outlet, and her voice carried the kind of hysteria that makes great television. "This was a coordinated attack," she screamed at Jessica Martinez's camera. "Hoffman deliberately released killer bees to assault peaceful community members." Deputy Martinez looked at me with the expression of someone who'd heard this story before. "Mr. Hoffman, did you intentionally release bees to attack these people?" "No, ma'am," I replied, standing calmly on my front porch with a coffee cup that tasted like victory. "Bees don't like loud strangers on their property. Neither do I. Natural consequences for unnatural behavior." That's when Derek emerged from his Tesla, still carrying the surveying equipment that would prove their fraud scheme. Deputy Martinez immediately noticed the expensive gear. "Sir, what exactly were you surveying on someone else's property?" Derek went pale under his tech bro tan. "Just, checking boundary lines for the community event." "Without permission from the property owner? While trespassing?" Jessica Martinez thrust her microphone toward Derek as he realized 500 witnesses had just watched him attempt property fraud on live television. "Sir, can you explain why you were surveying private property during an unauthorized camping event?" That's when I decided it was time for my mic drop moment. "Jessica, I've got something your viewers might find interesting," I said, producing the folder that had been sitting on my kitchen table for 3 weeks. "Karen and Derek aren't just organizing illegal camping trips. They're running a real estate fraud scheme that's been targeting rural families across Northern California." "Mom?" I handed her Derek's business correspondence, the emails about server farm development, and evidence from previous harassment campaigns in Pleasanton and Petaluma. They force people off their land with HOA harassment, buy below market value, then flip for massive development profits. My property was targeted for a $15 million server farm. Karen's face went through several shades of red as Jessica read Derek's emails on camera. "These documents show your husband's company planned to purchase Mr. Hoffman's land for commercial development. Is this camping event part of a harassment campaign designed to force a property sale?" "That's completely false," Karen shrieked. "We're promoting community wellness and healing." "Then why does this email from your husband mention 6 months max and will have his land for half price?" Jessica asked, reading directly from Derek's correspondence. Deputy Martinez stepped forward with the kind of authority that comes from 20 years of dealing with desperate criminals. "Mrs. Westfield, we've also received reports about your attempt to bribe County Inspector Valdez yesterday. Combined with organized trespassing, fraudulent documents, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, you're looking at multiple felony charges." The taste of satisfaction was better than honey as Karen finally understood her community healing weekend had become a public exposure of criminal enterprise. 47 cars worth of her followers were driving home with bee stings and stories about the yoga instructor who'd led them into illegal camping on private property. Then Inspector Valdez arrived, apparently having heard about the incident on his radio scanner. "Deputy Martinez, I should mention that Mrs. Westfield offered me $2,000 yesterday to falsify inspection reports about Mr. Hoffman's beekeeping operation." Jessica Martinez's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Sir, you're saying Mrs. Westfield attempted to bribe a county official?" "Yes, ma'am. We've got audio recording and witness testimony, part of what appears to be a systematic pattern of harassment designed to force property transfers." Derek tried running for his Tesla, but Deputy Martinez blocked his path. "Sir, we're going to need you to stay for questioning about these fraud allegations." The final piece of evidence came when the emergency medical team started documenting sting injuries. Every single victim had been trespassing on my property, participating in an unauthorized commercial event while enabling attempted property fraud. As Karen and Derek were placed in separate squad cars for transport to county jail, Jessica Martinez wrapped up her live broadcast. A community healing event becomes criminal exposure as local property owner uses natural pest control to defend against organized real estate fraud. The sweet smell of honey mixed with the distant sound of sirens carrying Karen and Derek away from the rural paradise they'd tried to steal. Sometimes justice comes with 40,000 tiny wings and absolutely no patience for entitled criminals. 6 weeks later, the sweet taste of justice had fermented into something even better: real change for our entire community. Karen and Derek pled guilty to multiple charges rather than face federal fraud prosecution. Conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, document forgery, bribery of public officials, and organizing commercial trespassing on private property. Derek's business license was revoked, Streamline Solutions was shut down, and they both faced 3 years in state prison. The financial settlement was everything I could have hoped for. Karen's insurance company paid $127,000 in medical claims for bee sting injuries during her illegal camping event. Derek's company faced civil fraud lawsuits from 500 trespassing victims who'd been misled about the event's legal status. More importantly, their conviction opened investigations into previous harassment campaigns. The elderly couple from Pleasanton recovered $400,000 in damages. The veteran with PTSD from Petaluma got his therapy horse property back, plus $300,000 in compensation. Derek's real estate empire collapsed faster than a house of cards in a California earthquake. Channel 7's investigation won a regional journalism award for exposing systematic fraud targeting rural families. Jessica Martinez's series, The New Land Grab, documented how gentrification pressure was being weaponized by developers across Northern California. But the real victory was what happened to our community. The HOA dissolved after board members resigned in embarrassment over Karen's criminal activities. Property values stabilized without development pressure. Most of Karen's wellness warriors apologized personally, admitting they'd been manipulated into believing fake legal claims about public access rights. I donated half my settlement to the Millerville Volunteer Fire Department for new thermal imaging equipment. The other half funded Neighbors Helping Neighbors, a honey delivery program for elderly residents who can't drive to farmers markets. Mrs. Patterson gets 2 jars monthly, Eddie Kowalski trades honey for tomatoes from his garden, and 6 other longtime residents receive sliding-scale pricing that makes premium honey affordable on fixed incomes. The elementary school added my property to their agricultural education program. Once a month, I teach kids about pollination, honey production, and why protecting rural agriculture matters for everyone. Amazing how enthusiastic 8-year-olds get about bee biology when you explain that their food depends on pollinator health. The most unexpected healing came when my daughter Jennifer called from Oregon. She'd seen Channel 7's news coverage and realized her stubborn father wasn't just a grief-stricken hermit anymore. He was someone willing to fight for principle and community. She visited with my grandkids that Christmas, watching 6-year-old Emma carefully examine bee frames while her brother Jake asked endless questions about hive management, reminded me that some things matter more than honey production: family, legacy, teaching the next generation to stand up for what's right. The Veterans Therapy program started in spring. Turns out bee maintenance provides the same kind of focused, purposeful activity that helps PTSD recovery. Working with creatures that depend on routine, cooperation, and protecting their community appeals to military mindset. 6 local veterans now help maintain expanded hive operations while learning agricultural skills. Sitting on my porch last month, drinking coffee with honey from Rodriguez Hive, I realized Sharon would approve of how this turned out, not just defending our land, but using that defense to strengthen the entire community. Her worry stone sits on my kitchen table next to business cards from new beekeeping students and thank you notes from honey delivery customers. The sound of bees returning home at sunset still provides the soundtrack to my evening routine, but now it's accompanied by occasional visits from neighbors who understand that protecting rural character benefits everyone, not just old-timers with stubborn streaks. Derek's failed server farm site became community garden space. Karen's abandoned wellness retreat concept was replaced by actual community events, harvest festivals, beekeeping workshops, and agricultural education programs that bring people together instead of driving them apart. The crunch of gravel in my driveway now announces friends instead of trespassers, students instead of harassment campaigns, and deliveries of fresh vegetables instead of legal complaints. 3 things I learned from this experience. Document everything, know your property rights, and never underestimate the power of 40,000 tiny allies who don't appreciate trespassers. What's your HOA nightmare story? Share it in the comments below and remember to subscribe for more justice-served stories. Sometimes the smallest creatures deliver the biggest lessons about standing up to bullies who think they can steal your life's work. Community matters. Truth wins. And honey really is sweeter when it's earned protecting what you love.